Hi, it's me, Brooks. Welcome to Heal This. My sweet friend Samantha Turner has joined us today. She is a healer, an intuitive life coach, and a medium. And we're going to talk about all things energy, intuition, and some of the things that maybe we don't talk about as often, like reading energy and what that means in our lives. So I want to welcome you today. Hi, Samantha. How are you?
Hi, I'm
Hi.
so good. Thank you for having me today.
Yeah, I'm glad you're here. This is going to be fun. I'm excited to talk. So maybe,
Me too.
and could you introduce yourself to everyone? Give us some background. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. So, my name is Sam Samantha. I go by either. I am a healer in the local area. So, like you said, I do spiritual channeling for people, I do energy work, intuitive life coaching. But it's been a long, interesting path to that point. So, I was actually in the military for several years prior to that. I'm a mom. And my family, we just moved here 2 years ago from Texas. I was stationed out in Fort Hood, and it's a brand new chapter that I'm starting in the area, but I'm very happy to be here.
That's awesome. Thank you. Yeah. So coming from the military to what you do now, that's a humongous change, I would assume. And I think that maybe share a little bit about how, I mean, we always have our intuition. It's just how tuned in we are to our intuition, really. And so did that play any part in your military career?
Oh, absolutely. So I was, well, I guess even prior to that, I was a
Mhm.
very sensitive child growing up, so much that it was actually quite difficult. And I applaud my parents for doing the best that they could, but some of it was kind of hard to understand. And a lot of things related to being hypersensitive get kind of mislabeled. So navigating that as a young child was challenging, just trying to figure out how to exist in the world without getting overwhelmed all the time by energy, by spirit, was challenging. And then when I was a teenager, I really wasn't sure what I wanted to do after high school. My mom had been in the military, and so I was somewhat familiar. But I decided to go and I did a summer camp at a military academy, and I loved it. And I ultimately decided to try to go, and it was a long process to get accepted. But once I was there, it became very clear very fast. I remember my first night there, I realized that I could not handle being as sensitive as I was in that environment. And
Mm.
I had been dealing with a lot of sleep issues up until that point, and so I really just I remember just praying because the first night I didn't sleep at all, and you can't really afford to not sleep when you're doing physical things. So I really just prayed and I said, someone help me to kind of quiet this in myself a bit because I won't be able to make it here if I am this wide open. And I didn't even at the time really have the words to articulate what I was feeling,
Right.
but I really had to shut down a lot of it in that exact moment so that I could survive getting through the basic training and really the next several years of being in the military just to kind of tone it down a bit.
Yeah. No, I'm glad you brought that up. I'm glad you brought up um, being a child and being hypersensitive and what that means. And I think that we're definitely going to talk more about that. So when you say here, when you said that being there, are you talking about basic training or is that even before that?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, yes. Specifically shutting down to be at basic training and being in
Yes.
that environment with the military. Just it was just too much.
Yes. Especially in those at the very beginning because they're really looking at your physical performance and if you can show up every day and right. I mean, later, once you've kind of hit some milestones of what they need you to do, then some of that intuitive work really starts to kick in, and you're kind of like, let me just let you in on a little bit here that I know this, right? I mean,
Yeah, yes, that's very true. And I think, and this is just my experience, but I think trying to shut things down a little bit, it's more of a not paying attention to it. You know what I mean?
yes,
Because it doesn't entirely go away. You can't entirely shut off that part of yourself. For me, it was just almost changing my perspective to not be as overwhelmed by the energy of things and just being able to deal with what's right in front of me, with the people who had expectations, with the
right,
tasks I had to accomplish, and things like that. But it really never left. And even during basic training, I had a lot of experiences that kind of confirmed that for me. But thankfully, it was in a way that I was able to get through it and not be just awake all night.
right. I can relate to that part. I think when we are small and we are receiving energetic information, so our intuition or other other ways that energy comes in through spirit or um, our the clairs, right? The clairvoyancy things. We see things, we hear things,
Mm-hmm.
we feel things. Maybe we're extremely empathic. We're feeling other people's stuff. Um, it's coming in, and it is very hard to turn it off. And I didn't
Mm-hmm.
necessarily want to turn it off, but like you said, I could we just dial it down a little bit so that I
Yeah.
can get some sleep and that I can actually do the things I need to do and that are required of me. And so, um, as we get into this conversation, I would really love to talk more about how we hold space for our young people with the same thing going on.
Mm,
But I
absolutely.
yeah, I'm really interested in how you navigated because so some people, have something happen. They have a very big spiritual experience where maybe spirit comes to them or they witness something on an energetic level and they're like, yeah, that's too freaky or scary for me.
Mm-hmm.
I'm done turning that off. Don't need to have that go
Yeah.
on anymore. And then they go through their
Mm-hmm.
life and then they're like, I'd really like that to come back on some level so
Mm-hmm.
that because there's a disconnect there. So anyway, I'd love
Totally.
to hear more about your story. Sorry for me to go on and on. Okay, so
No, it's wonderful.
so you're in basic
Yeah.
training, you're going through all of that, and you're way more aware of what this is because, like you said, when before you understand what it is, it's just like a lot, and it can present itself
Yes.
as anxiety and, like you said, not being able to sleep or maybe just wanting to move
Mm-hmm.
all the time because it's coming in and we don't know how to process it. Sorry, your turn.
Totally. No, you're so right. And yes, because I didn't have the framework to entirely understand what my experiences were. So even though I interacted with spirit regularly and saw energy and felt energy and all of the things, I didn't know that about myself. I just,
Yes.
it was my experience of the world. And I knew other people didn't have the same experiences. So for me, I just kind of internalized it as I'm weird, like something's wrong. And goodness, I don't know how many times I went to the doctor, the eye doctor, like why I see things around people. And
Sure.
gosh, my poor mother, it took me so many times to try to figure it out. But it really was just because I didn't understand what it was outside of a medical or like a health type of
Right.
condition. So that was really challenging. And then of course within that is the religious side of things. So when you're brought up in an environment that has very particular views about what happens after people pass,
Absolutely.
and you aren't even really able to entertain something different than that, it can put you really at odds with yourself and at odds with your experiences. And that was hard for me because I would see ghosts and I would see spirit and trying to talk to my family about it, and in the religion I was brought up in, there's no such thing because you die and you wait until the second coming or whatever. So
Right.
it didn't make sense, and so that was very challenging.
Hmm. Yes. And there's also a lot of, um, well, I mean, so if you're bringing it up in a religious frame, right, and you're having
Hmm.
experiences you're not supposed to be having, then something is evil, or, there's
Hmm.
this darkness about it, when in actuality, it doesn't feel that way at all. It feels, I mean, yes, there is darkness. We have to acknowledge that it's there. But most of the
Sure.
time, we are experiencing an energetic exchange from people alive right now, right? And then
Yeah.
also
Yes.
someone who has passed, but they're just coming to give a good message. It's not anything negative. And so it is extremely confusing because you are in a
Yes.
specific narrative, right? And a specific frame of
Hmm.
like, this is what it looks like. And if it doesn't look like that for you, then yeah, there's something wrong with you. And so
Absolutely.
and if you don't even have the words to talk about it, I mean, for me
Hmm.
at least, that was part of my experience. Was I don't even really know how to explain to you what's happening right now. So yeah, I have to
Yes.
figure that part out.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's so hard. And it's hard for kids who are just trying to find something that helps you make sense of the world. I mean, for me, in that environment, religion was supposed to be it, right? It's like what you ground in, it's the way you understand things to be, and you live life, you get saved, you do all the things, and then you go to heaven. And to I remember one day I went with my mom to water a family friend's plants and got in the car with her after we were all done, and I saw their mother. Like, she had passed recently, and I just saw her plain as day standing in the window, and it really scared me because it didn't make sense. It directly challenged
Right.
everything that I believed in, and so I was very upset about it. But it wasn't a bad experience by any stretch. And in fact, she was a very lovely woman who was just maintaining a presence there for her family. And so it shouldn't have really been scary. What scared me was the fact that it kind of started breaking down some of the things that I had believed up to that point.
Yes.
So
Yes. Well, and
lots of that. And I, no, go ahead.
no, no, I don't want to. What were you going to say?
Yeah. And no, but and another, no, you're so fine. And another thing that I had a hard time with at that age was I was very sensitive to energy to the point of experiencing past lives. And that was another thing that just did not fit into that framework at all. Because
Hmm.
in my upbringing, you have one life and then you go to
Right.
heaven. There was no belief in reincarnation, didn't discuss it. It was sinful to even consider it. But yet I was having these experiences, and I remember experiencing one of my own past lives, and I must have been maybe 10 or so, and I became acutely aware of a past life I'd had of, and it can get a bit trippy because it's really all parallel lives. We don't have to go down
Yes.
that rabbit hole, but
Mhm.
so I experienced myself as having a car accident and being killed in a car accident, and I became acutely aware of having had that experience. I was an adult, and I knew that I was an adult, and I couldn't articulate that I had seen that and felt that and kind of experienced it integrating
Mhm.
because I didn't have the words for it. And so I remember trying to explain this to my mom because I suddenly got very anxious around driving.
Sure.
And I wasn't driving because I was a child. And so I kind of projected that onto my loved ones. So I never wanted my mom to go drive. And I would be just super obsessed with, drive safe, drive safe. And
Mhm.
I tried to explain it in my kid vocabulary. And I remember just saying, It feels like if life was a movie, the
Mm-hmm.
main character would have died doing this, and for some reason, I'm very upset about that. And
Mm-hmm.
that was the best way that I could try to describe it because it was palpable for me. And that took a long time to get through. But just things like that, that if I had, I guess, had the understanding that I had just kind of tapped into a soul memory of myself and then to be able to release it without trying to make it make sense in current reality, I think it would have been a bit, I don't know, less stressful as a kid. But that's just, those are things that I think society still has some ways to
Yes.
go in terms of understanding fully and to support kids along the way.
Yes. I think there is this, we have to be open, right? But then understanding that we don't control all of it. It has to be able to come
Mm-hmm.
in. And then you just said something that you don't, it doesn't have to make sense. And it doesn't, but we are so programmed to look at something and label it, identify it, and put it in a box
Mm-hmm.
somewhere, right? And so when something
Yes.
comes in, we have a memory or a thought and it doesn't make any kind of sense to us, then automatically, we just
Mm-hmm.
toss it out and we don't put any focus on it to let it just marinate and be there and process and then
Mm-hmm.
also, or maybe put it on the shelf for later. I'll come back to that when maybe I have the
Yeah.
language to articulate what's happening. Or what I found is when I really don't understand something, if I just say, okay, I would really like to know what this means. Could you show me what this means? And then I
Mm-hmm.
just wait on it. Something else will come in. I'll hear a podcast or be in a conversation with
Yeah.
someone or another client will come in. And I'm like, this is what was happening over here. This is making more
Yeah.
sense to me now. But a lot of times we don't allow that time or that space and we don't ask to be shown what it is. And so then it just gets
Mm-hmm.
tossed out and no, that didn't happen to me. No, I'm not crazy. No, no, you're not crazy. It's just like you
Yes.
said,
Yes.
energy is not linear. And we think we have put that line on it in this time space continuum life. Right. And
Mm-hmm.
so if there is other energy happening on different places or dimensions, or how else would you would say it, I that's why I'm always kind of like, what are the other words for it? um then
Yeah.
then it's okay to not know all the way
Mm-hmm.
what it is, but we can be shown what it is.
Absolutely.
And
Mm-hmm.
just because we're
No,
shown what it
completely
is
agree.
doesn't mean that we still even understand it. Even after we're shown it, we're still kind of like, okay, still
Yes.
not all the way getting that, but I'm going to allow some
Yep.
time for that to come in. Yeah. Yeah. So,
Absolutely. Well said. And I think just having that space is such a sacred thing. And, to hold that space for each other too, as we're navigating these things, because it doesn't all fit into our human consciousness. And I don't think it's intended to.
mhm.
Even in the work I do, I learn something new every single day. And it
Yes.
continues to blow my mind every single day, as it should, right? And I think it's okay that we don't understand all of it, but just allowing some space for the unknown and for the beauty that exists in the unknown instead of trying to diagnose or put into a
Yes,
box. I
that's a
think that
good
leaves
way
us
to
some room to
put it.
grow.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it.
Mm-hmm.
Let's go back a little bit more and talk about um, how you got to the part where you're like, okay, so I do this. This is what is happening to me. Was there something specific that happened that caused you to say, okay, I'm going to accept this, go with this, and just start seeing what happens?
Sure. Well, it's funny because growing up, I had experiences my whole life, and mediumship runs in my family. It's it's funny because it's part of the experiences that I'd kind of grown up around, but my mom and my grandmother both talked to spirit regularly and saw them clearly.
Mhm.
But then we found religion and we pretended we never had those experiences, kind of.
Mhm.
And there's purpose and everything, but so I didn't really
Sure.
understand much about myself at that time, and it's funny now because anytime I had experiences growing up, I just thought it was a ghost that everybody would have seen. Does that kind of
Yes.
make sense? It never occurred to
Absolutely.
me that I was doing something. It was just like, oh man, that was strange. So I didn't really have that awareness growing up. It was just experiences that I had, and I thought it was just my normal.
Mhm.
But then I think I really started opening up again when I was pregnant. So that was an incredibly spiritual experience for me. And that was around the first time that I realized that I'm not having experiences that I think everyone does on a normal basis.
Yes.
So I and I love talking to people about how spiritual pregnancy is because I think that that part gets left out a lot. We just
For
talk about the
sure.
physical aspect of it, but you really are bringing a soul into the physical. So it is incredibly spiritual, but that was a big, I'd say, chapter for me and really starting to recognize more about myself and how sensitive I was because I experienced conscious conception, which I guess is not super common, but I had never been pregnant before and I had it the first time. And really, all that is where you know and experience the moment that the soul comes in. So, not just the physical, like becoming pregnant, but the moment that the soul of the baby joins you.
Mhm.
And I was acutely aware of that. And it didn't really make sense to me why I knew that, but I just suddenly knew I was pregnant and I could feel and see her around me. And I knew that it was
Mhm.
going to be a girl, and it was a wonderful experience. But being pregnant really just opened things up for me in a major
Mhm.
way. I was able to start experiencing some of my past lives with my daughter, and that
Mhm.
was hard to articulate. But so I was doing a lot of journaling at the time, but I started really hearing spirit a lot more during that time.
Yes.
And especially after she was born, the whole mother's intuition thing, absolutely a real thing, but it kind of opened up on a level that almost scared me a bit because it was so much. I would, put her down for sleep, and then I would try to go to sleep, and then spirit would be in my ear and say, not yet, she's about to cry. And I'd sit up, and sure enough, she'd start crying, and I'd go get her.
Mhm.
But, and things like that, it freaked me out a little bit because it was just turned
Right.
up really
Wow.
fast. So,
Yes.
so a lot of that, but it was always good. I mean, even though it was like jarring a bit, it was always from a place of love. And so the more I started to trust it and realize that, okay, this is okay, this is good,
Mhm. Mhm.
it stopped freaking me out as much.
Yes.
And I think it was that experience. It's funny now, but for the first time in my life, I felt like I wanted to go and talk to a psychic. And I had never done anything like that. It just kind of dropped in that I should go do that. And so it took me weeks to finally get the guts to go do it because it still kind of challenged that old idea I had in my mind from growing up. Like, is this safe? Is it going to unlock
Right.
something that's scary or dangerous? And but I couldn't shake it. So I finally went. It was this expo out in Texas. And I went and I sat with this wonderful lady, and she was completely pleasant. And she told me, she said that I am a medium and that I talk to spirit regularly and that I'm intended to be a healer and things like that. And it was a really pleasant experience, but in hindsight, I still feel like a lot of that went in one ear and out the other because
Yes.
I thought it was so sweet. But I was still in the
Right.
army at that time. I said, I don't know what a healer is. I don't have any idea what that
Right.
even means. I'm just a tired mom.
Right.
So it was a pleasant experience, but even that took, I think, years later to finally make sense. So, getting back to what you said about holding space for things that don't make sense and then being open to getting answers about things later. I didn't understand parts of myself until I was, gosh, in the past 5 years did it
Sure.
start to finally make sense, all the
Right.
experiences I'd had growing up.
Yes.
So I don't know that there was any one major thing that happened that started pointing me in that direction. There were breadcrumbs, I'd say,
Yes.
along the way. But getting sick, I think, if I had to pick anything that really made it very clear to me that I had to change paths and that I was going a different direction with my life, that's probably what it was. So I could
I
talk more about that if you'd
Yes,
like.
and before you even say any of that, I think so. I'm a huge believer that our physical body is a huge conduit housing this spiritual self and our intuition. And it shows us, it's like saying yes or no constantly to, the foods we eat, to the things we listen to where the environment we're in, the people we're around, all of that kind of stuff. And so, and if we're not listening to who we really are and our true authentic self, our physical body is manifesting how unhappy, our body, our body self is. It's saying, no,
Mm-hmm.
you're stop, go the other way,
Yep.
listen to me. And we constantly think we know
Absolutely.
better, and then as soon as we
Mm-hmm.
hurt enough, as soon as it feels bad enough, we stop. And then we go, what is going
Mm-hmm.
on here? Now, that's not to say that sometimes this is a inherited thing or a, a past energy that's coming in through our physical body, through emotions or other ways that it can do that. But um, most of the time, it is us, right? We are not listening. We are not listening to ourselves, our true authentic self,
Mm-hmm.
our intuition. And so it starts manifesting in our physical body. And
Mm-hmm.
so you become sick, you start having symptoms that don't make sense, I assume, but I don't know all the details.
Yes. Yes. So yeah, you're completely right. The body will tell you what you're not listening to, and that was definitely the case for
Mm-hmm.
me. I I went to college. I went to a military academy, graduated, and I served as a military intelligence officer for 5 years. Served in Afghanistan and eventually ended up in Fort Hood, Texas, where I was kind of finishing up my contract. I had two kids while I was on active duty, and after my son was born, so the youngest, this would have been 21, I came back from maternity leave and returned to a new building that had suffered from a lot of water damage. Texas had been hit with a really bad ice storm that year of
Oh
historic
yeah.
proportions. And so we had experienced a lot of pipes bursting and things like that. And so by the time I showed up in March, a lot of those things that had not been remedied had caused a lot of like damage to the walls and the ceilings and things like that. And so I came back to work. I was in a new environment with different people. So I was just trying to adjust and, still very much in the throes of the newborn stage, but was just trying to get up and going. I had 1 year left on my contract for serving, and I knew that I was going to be getting out after that because I just wanted more time with my children and it was time.
Mm-hmm.
But shortly after returning to work, I started having, just as you said, a lot of really strange symptoms, things that started really small but gradually got worse. So I would have random tingling throughout my body. I would have like handshakes, almost like I had too much caffeine, but I didn't.
Mm-hmm.
Things that you would completely overlook, and because everything's a little bit weird after having a baby. So I ignored a lot of it for a long time. I finally went to the doctor because I was having a hard time hearing out of one of my ears. And we just eventually started chasing symptoms. It was like one thing after another. None of them seemed
Mm-hmm.
really related, but it just gradually got worse. And my job in military intelligence, and I was an officer, so we do a lot of briefings, we do a lot of writing and things like that. And I was realizing that my brain was just having a hard time keeping up, just brain fog. It took a very long time for me to read something and to comprehend it without it just going in and out. And my
Mm-hmm.
memory was just being very strange. People that I'd worked with for a long time, I couldn't remember their name, their rank, and it was just starting to become alarming.
Mm-hmm.
So, chasing symptoms, it took several months, and I was just gradually getting worse and worse. I experienced extreme muscle failure. So, my arms, like I couldn't pick up the kids anymore. I was having a hard time just like forming complete sentences. It was very scary, and so I had all the blood work, all the tests, all the things, and nobody really knew what it was. So it took a long time. I ended up having to go and start doing research on my own because it didn't take very long for me to start thinking it might be related to the building that I was in because
Mm-hmm.
of the water damage, and there was mold and things like that. And so, to the best of my ability, I tried to read and start understanding about toxicity in the environment and how it can
Mm-hmm.
actually not just cause an allergy response, but also neurological and create a bunch of
Yes.
symptoms related to it. So it was really through my own research that I started understanding what was actually happening to my body. But sadly, it just took so long to get to that information. And it didn't really matter by the time I figured it out because by that point in the military, there wasn't much they could do for me. And even if that was the case, there was
Mm-hmm.
no clear answer for how to fix it. It was just,
Sure.
this is your life now. So, and you can't stay. I went from being able to run, 5 miles at a time to getting like having to stop just walking into my building.
Mm-hmm.
So I was
Yes.
medically retired and kind of sent on my way to figure it out for myself. And it was a very low point because I just didn't know what to do. Even though I discovered what it probably was, I didn't know how to fix myself. And it really wasn't until I started learning about neuroplasticity and a chronic fight or flight response and how the brain can kind of get stuck when it's overwhelmed by things. But that if you can stop that fight or flight response, the physical symptoms will calm down as well.
Mm-hmm.
So, against all odds, I really kind of dove into rewiring my brain. And at one point, I was so sensitive because at this point, I had multiple chemical sensitivities, which is where you react to just about everything. Things that you weren't
Yes.
allergic to before are suddenly causing hives and
Mm-hmm.
migraines and just silly things like scented trash bags. Couldn't be
Yes.
around
No,
them because I would just break out in a rash.
I was
Yeah.
gonna say,
And so
and
my world was just getting small.
the whole time you're telling the story, I just want to keep reminding and kind of flash up here, and
Yeah.
is that you're a highly sensitive person. You know,
Mm-hmm.
that's a that is a thing. I mean, and like you just said, I I can walk into a building and go, "What is that smell?" And no one else will smell
Mm-hmm.
it. Or
Yep.
what is that
Yep.
sound? And no one else is hearing the
Mm-hmm.
sound. And it's like, I know, but it's like nails on a chalkboard, right? It's like I
Yes.
can't relax. My body is
Mm-hmm.
feeling it and hearing it and smelling it, all the things. So anyway, okay. So
Yes.
yes, sorry. I just wanted to bring attention to that because for other people who are having the same experience, but they don't know that that's a thing, or they feel weird because
Mm-hmm.
something is really, they can taste it on their tongue, right? A smell, like that's a thing,
Yes.
and so
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
um I could tell you what color it is too.
Totally.
It's just kind of like
Yeah. Yes. Yes.
so that's a thing. And
Absolutely.
so we need to really listen to that. Our body's trying to tell us, that this is harming
Mm-hmm.
your physical body. Please remove yourself so
Yep.
that you can really be more in tune with what you need to be. So, okay. So, go back. Sorry about that.
No, no, you're so right. It was a very bizarre thing to experience because, it's overwhelming symptoms for sure. And it was at a level that I couldn't live with because it was debilitating. But at the same time, it was almost interesting because, the brain, the body picks up on things even before we consciously are aware of it.
Mm-hmm.
So if I walked into a room and, somebody had just used a cleaner of some sort, even if it was scentless, I would start having a reaction, even though my brain, like I didn't consciously know that that was
Sure.
there. My body would react to it.
Mm-hmm.
So it was very much like my hypersensitivity to energy was playing out very physically at the same time. So,
Yes.
and it is incredibly common. I did learn that along the way. And it was also important for me to understand that it wasn't just the building that I had gone to that may have contributed to kind of a tipping point, but getting stuck in fight or flight mode can happen for a multitude of reasons and a combination of things. For me, I really believe it was more of a perfect storm, just
Mm-hmm.
chronic stress building up to a certain point.
Having a
Injuries can
baby,
contribute, and then you
you know.
having a baby, yes, and then all of it just coming together, and your
Yes.
system just it does get stuck. So it took a long
Mm-hmm.
time. I worked with traditional doctors. I worked with integrative doctors, and this is my own experience, and I don't recommend this for anybody else. It was just what I had to do. Disclaimer, but I was so sensitive to everything that I couldn't even take the supplements that I was being given to help support detox.
Yes.
So I had like tinctures to take that, are supposed to support, but if I was on 1/8 of a drop. And if I
Mm-hmm.
took that, I would have flu symptoms for 3 days. So it was just an absurd amount of sensitivity. So I actually ended up having to stop all medication to include supplements to help myself. And that was just what I had to do. So I really just did all at once. I completely committed to focusing on rewiring. And for me, it's funny in hindsight, but I didn't look at it from a spiritual perspective. I was really focusing on physiological and stopping those pathways in my brain.
Mm-hmm.
But it involved a lot of mindfulness and meditation exercises. I just didn't think of it that way. But it took it took a lot of time. It took a lot of commitment doing these exercises to try to like usher in joy and love and gratitude in the moments that I was having physical symptoms, because doing that in those moments helped to send my brain firing in a better direction
Mm-hmm.
rather than continuing. And within 18 months of having the diagnosis that eventually kicked me out of the military, I was completely symptom free from doing that. And it was a miracle. I mean, by all stretches, it
Yes.
was a complete miracle. But that experience, having gone through that, really opened my eyes to understanding one, that our bodies are a miracle,
Mm-hmm.
absolutely, how they are completely intertwined with our emotions, with our thinking mind. It responds to what we tell ourselves, to the things that we
Mm-hmm.
think. And so it was a major wake up call for me to understand that your environment gets a vote, the things you put in your body gets a vote. And so it really changed everything for me. And so at the end of all of this, when I came out and I was no longer in the military and trying to figure out what was next for me, I really felt this kind of shift towards studying more about this. And I couldn't stop reading about natural healing. And
Mm-hmm.
that's when I discovered energy work. And it was really fascinating to me. It was Reiki first. And just this idea that there are people who are helping work directly with the energy that I had believed helped me. And so as soon as I started learning more about that and I had my first session, it just blew everything wide open for me. So
Yes.
everything that I had tried to quiet as a kid, and going into the military, it was like all the guards got ripped
Mm-hmm.
off at that point.
Yep.
And it was a lot, but purposeful too. And
Mm-hmm.
that's when it really became clear to me that this was actually a path that I'm supposed to pursue. I was in business school. That was what I ended up doing after getting out of the military because I wasn't quite sure what the next step was going to be. I was going to study healthcare just because I kind of thought that might be relevant. And then it became very clear. I started getting a lot of guidance and downloads from my own guides that
Yes.
no, this you're not going to fit in anywhere. You've got to make your own path with this. And
That's right.
so I really
That's
took the
right.
plunge and have been trusting it ever since. And it continues to evolve.
Yes. Yes. I love it. I love your story.